I see a tweet from Lisa Leslie. It says both Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark deserve to win Rookie of the Year. My jaw hit the floor. And I said, Dave, you got to do something. Because I'm starting to worry about Angel Reese and her mental health. What comes along with the media, specifically like ESPN? Angel Reese, generational rebounder, possibly. Very good rebounder. Motor, can't shoot a lick. One of the worst shooters in the league.
You know that feeling when your favorite player is crushing it, but people keep talking about someone else? That's what's happening with Caitlin Clark right now. Her fans are making noise, big noise. And it's got people like Dave Portnoy fired up. Let's talk about why this matters for all of us who love the game. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. Such waves of shock, they are only the start. Even the pros were taken aback by what these Caitlin Clark supporters did next. It went beyond simple applause. You believe that you understand fan devotion. Rethink your thoughts. The fans of Caitlin Clark were in town for more than just a game when they arrived in Dallas. Their purpose was to create history. Everyone from team officials to seasoned sports reporters were taken aback by the electric vibe and filled streets. This was not your typical fan attendance. Rather, it was the beginning of a basketball revolution. What precisely did these supporters accomplish that was so remarkable then? First of all, they demonstrated more than simply their presence. Images and videos of Clark fans swarming the streets, wearing her jersey and holding banners went viral on social media. It was hard to ignore the excitement they generated, both online and offline. This is where things become really fascinating though. The social media staff of the Indiana Fever saw more in this than just ordinary fan fervor. They identified it as the movement that it was. They admitted that these supporters were there to voice their opinions regarding women's basketball and its future, in addition to simply offering encouragement. Furthermore, others than just the Fever noticed. Not even the other team's players could not be impressed. Even though he was first disappointed by the level of enthusiasm for the visiting club, one Dallas Wings player had to concede that this attendance was exceptional. She saw that for women's basketball to advance and succeed, just this kind of fan involvement was required. Let's discuss what this actually implies for the sport though. These supporters are actively involved in altering the perception of women's sports and are no longer merely bystanders. They are putting in a lot of effort, speaking up and asking that the game they adore receive more attention. It's not just about one game or one individual in this. It's about changing the way we think about and encourage women's basketball. These supporters are demonstrating that there is a sizable audience for women's sports and they aren't afraid to turn up and make noise to support it. And here's the thing, fan interaction like this has the ability to completely transform the game. It has an impact on sponsorships, ticket sales, media attention, and even young girls' perceptions of their own athletic ability. This kind of fan attendance sends a powerful statement that cannot be disregarded. However, it goes beyond numbers. It all comes down to how committed and passionate these supporters are. They're extending their excitement to everyone around them and aren't simply watching the game, they're living it. A new storm sprang out just as the dust was starting to settle on this fan frenzy. Although Dave Portnoy has some stats that will make you rethink your assumptions about who is leading the Rookie of the Year competition, you might still be mistaken. What actually occurs behind the scenes when the WNBA is covered? Let us introduce Dave Portnoy, the media tycoon renowned for his raw perspectives. His remarks are taking off like wildfire and have just put a wrench into the WNBA story. When it comes to the media's portrayal of Angel Reese and the competition for Rookie of the Year, Portnoy isn't holding back. What is it that's motivating Portnoy? People. It's all about the statistics. He is highlighting a striking difference between the most recent performances of Reese and Caitlin Clark. Reese's last 4 games, on the other hand, haven't been pretty. According to Portnoy, 11 points on 26% shooting and a 0-4 team record. Now contrast those numbers with Clark's 48% shooting, 24 points, and a perfect 4-0 record as a team. But Portnoy is not merely reciting figures. He's pointing up what he believes to be a more serious issue in the sports media. He contends that narratives about players like Clark and Reese are shaped by a woke agenda. He believes that despite Reese's lackluster performance, the media continues to discuss her as the Rookie of the Year. Perhaps you're asking yourself, why does this matter? According to Portnoy, it goes beyond just providing accurate reporting. His concern is the effect on the athletes personally. In fact, he has voiced worries about Reese's mental health, saying that the media is unnecessarily pressuring her by keeping her in a race in which she is no longer competitive. This goes beyond a single player or one prize. It's about how stories in the media can affect how we view athletes and their accomplishments. The arguments made by Portnoy pose some difficult queries. When we read about these players, are we seeing the whole picture? Or is the tale we're witnessing being shaped to suit a particular goal? Consider it. Do we ever receive the whole story when we hear about a player's difficulties? When we examine the stats of several athletes, are we making fair comparisons? According to Portnoy, perhaps we're not. This is where things become really fascinating though. Portnoy's criticism of the media for elevating Reese goes beyond that. He claims that they are harming her. By his reasoning, it is not only unjust to other players to keep her in a discourse she is no longer competitive in, but it may also be detrimental to Reese personally. We are being forced to view sports coverage differently by this entire circumstance. It goes beyond who wins the most games or scores the most points. It all comes down to the stories that are being told about those accomplishments and how they are portrayed to us. What does this signify for fans then? It suggests that we may need to start looking past the news headlines. When we learn of a player's incredible season or poor performances, we may need to look a little closer. Are we receiving the entire story or just the portions that make sense in a particular storyline? The sports world is in a frenzy of controversy after Portnoy's remarks. While some are supporting him for speaking up, others disagree with his perspective. But one thing is certain, this argument is far from ended, regardless of where you stand. Fair coverage is one thing, but what if the narrative we're hearing is based entirely on shaky assumptions? You might be overlooking the game within the game that is happening in front of our very eyes. Are you curious in the true factors influencing women's basketball? These days, it's not just about what occurs on the court, and it's taking place in headlines, tweets, and TV segments, a whole different game. We're discussing the influence of media narratives on how we perceive athletes such as Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. Consider it. Do you ever pause to consider the source of information you hear regarding a player's performance, or the way it's being conveyed? The way a narrative is conveyed can have just as much significance as the story itself, which brings us to our point. Let's dissect it. Caitlin Clark is one of the contenders, riding a tide of admiration and strong numbers. Conversely, Angel Reese has been having difficulties recently, but he is still being discussed for Rookie of the Year. You could assume that this only has to do with how well they play on the court. However, it goes beyond that. The way we view these athletes is greatly influenced by the media. They choose which narratives to convey, which approaches to pursue, and which details to emphasize. And how fans see athletes may be significantly impacted by such choices. For instance, a media outlet is forming a narrative when it highlights Reese's prior accomplishments, while downplaying her more recent difficulties. The same is true when they highlight Clark's fan base, more so than her real gameplay. These stories have the potential to obscure the actual events occurring on the court. However, why is this relevant? To begin with, it may have an impact on the athletes directly. Put yourself in Reese's position and imagine hearing about a race you're no longer competitive in all the time. That must have a cost, doesn't it? Furthermore, Clark might have difficult expectations to live up to as a result of all this excitement. But it's not just about the athletes. Fan interaction may also be impacted by these stories. Fans' perceptions of the game, their favorite players, and even whether they watch at all can all be influenced by the stories they are told about a player. What then is the true stake in this? Is it more about who can tell the best story, or is it about performance? Because it appears like the coaches aren't making as many decisions as the media at this time. Don't get me wrong though, women's basketball's growth depends on media coverage. It raises awareness of the game, features outstanding sportsmen, and has the power to motivate upcoming players. But we have a problem when stories begin to take precedence over real performances. We are being forced to view sports coverage differently by this entire circumstance. It goes beyond who wins the most games or scores the most points. It all comes down to how those accomplishments are portrayed to us and the narratives that are created around them. What action, therefore, can we take? To begin with, we should begin to consider the sports stories we read and listened into more carefully. When we learn of a player's incredible season or poor performances, we may need to look a little closer. Are we receiving the entire story, or just the portions that make sense in a particular storyline? Additionally, we may focus more on the games themselves. Form your own views after observing the players in action and examining the stats for yourself. Never simply trust someone else's information about a player or a game. And here's an outrageous idea. Perhaps we ought to start demanding more from the sports media. Expect impartial, truthful reporting that concentrates on the action on the court rather than just what makes for a catchy title.